I was halfway through answering my morning emails when a deep, unfamiliar voice boomed across the open plan office. Lizzie? I looked up. The man wasn't asking. He was summoning. Daniel Cross, the brand new CEO, stood in the doorway to the main floor, framed in sunlight and arrogance. His tailored suit probably cost more than my car. Conversations around me faltered. A few coworkers glanced between us, eyes wide. Yes? I said, standing halfway. He smirked like a predator spotting easy prey. A word. Now. I followed him into the glass-walled conference room, my heels clicking on the polished floor. He didn't invite me to sit. Instead, he stepped to the head of the table, hands braced on the surface like a general addressing troops. Let's not waste each other's time, he said, voice carrying just enough for people passing by to hear. Your role here? Completely redundant. You're a waste of payroll. The words landed with deliberate cruelty. Around us, silhouettes paused just outside the glass, the office's silent audience. I kept my expression neutral, even as my pulse thudded in my ears. I see. Pack your desk, Daniel continued. Security will escort you out within the hour. No warning, no discussion, just a public humiliation dressed up as leadership. He expected outrage, anger, begging maybe, but instead I nodded once. Understood. He blinked, a fraction thrown. That's it? That's it, I said, my voice even. Because what Daniel Cross didn't know, what nobody in this building knew, was that 2 days ago I'd signed documents that made me the majority shareholder of this company. And if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that the sweetest victories aren't shouted in the moment. They're served later, slowly when the other person thinks they've already won. The truth was, I'd seen Daniel coming from a mile away. Not literally. I'd never met him before today. But I'd read enough about him in industry papers to know his type. Brash, aggressive, obsessed with power plays. And I'd known the moment the board announced he was replacing Mr. Chandler as CEO that my days here in my current role were numbered. What he couldn't possibly have known was that my role at this company had never been just about my job title. 2 days earlier, I'd sat in my lawyer's office, hands folded on a thick oak desk that smelled faintly of lemon polish and history. Across from me sat Margaret Sloan, a woman who had represented my family's business interests for over 20 years. The documents between us were neatly stacked, each page heavy with embossed seals. Once you sign here and here, Margaret said, tapping the final page, the transfer will be complete. You'll hold 62% of the company's voting shares. I stared at her, still slightly dazed. And you're sure this won't trigger any public filings yet? Completely airtight, she replied. Your uncle structured the sale through a private trust to avoid scrutiny. The board won't know until you choose to inform them. The pen in my hand felt heavier than it should have. With one signature, I'd have more control than anyone else in this building, even the incoming CEO. My uncle's words echoed in my mind. He'd told me years ago, patience, Lizzie. There will come a day when you'll need leverage. Don't waste it too soon. I signed. Margaret slid the documents into a locked leather folder. Congratulations, she said with the faintest of knowing smiles. Now, standing in the middle of the conference room while Daniel Cross announced my termination like a victory speech, I understood exactly what my uncle had meant. I didn't need to fight back now. I just needed to let him dig his own grave. I returned to my desk without a word. My team, well, former team, pretended to work. But I caught the furtive glances, the whispered what happened, behind cupped hands. I packed slowly, carefully, choosing only a few personal items. The ceramic mug Emma from accounting had given me last Christmas. The small cactus that had somehow survived my neglect. A framed photo of my parents, taken on the day my father cut the ribbon on the company's first warehouse. Security arrived, awkward and apologetic. As they escorted me to the elevator, I caught my reflection in the glass. Calm, collected, and, if I looked closely, just the hint of a smile at the corner of my mouth, because I knew something Daniel didn't. The next shareholders meeting was scheduled for next Thursday, and this time, I wouldn't be attending as an employee. That evening, I sat in my apartment, the leather folder Margaret had given me resting on the coffee table. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal, the reality of it still sinking in. 62% of the company. I thought about my father, about the years he'd poured into building a business that valued its people, and about how quickly that culture had eroded under corporate arrogance. Daniel Cross had just made the mistake of underestimating me in front of the entire office. And I was going to make sure that the day I walked back into that boardroom, it wouldn't be to ask for my job back. It would be to take his. The next morning, my phone buzzed before I'd even made coffee. 2 missed calls from HR, 1 email marked urgent in all caps. Exit interview, mandatory attendance 10:30 a.m. I smiled to myself and slid the phone back onto the counter. Let them stew. They'd get nothing from me. Not yet. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee and opened my laptop. The leather folder Margaret had given me sat beside it, the weight of it more than physical. Inside was the power Daniel didn't know existed, the 62% voting stake that made me untouchable once I decided to act. I opened my email and typed a short message to Margaret. We move next Thursday. Prepare the formal notice to the board. I'll sign in person. Her reply came within minutes. Understood. I'll have everything ready. Expect pushback once the notice is served. Pushback was exactly what I wanted. I didn't step foot in the office for the rest of the week. Instead, I spent those days in quiet preparation. Not the Hollywood kind, no dramatic stakeouts or last-minute miracles, but the slow, methodical gathering of ammunition. My first meeting was with Oliver Grant, an old friend from my operations days who now worked in logistics. We met in a tiny cafe 3 blocks from the office, away from curious eyes. He arrived wearing the same worried look I'd seen on several former colleagues' faces since the firing. "What the hell happened?" he asked as soon as he sat down. "Daniel's been strutting around like he just won a war." "He thinks he did," I said evenly. "I'm letting him enjoy the parade before the rain starts." Oliver leaned in, lowering his voice. "Lizzie, what are you planning?" "Nothing illegal," I said with a small smile. "But I need information. Honest numbers. The ones Daniel isn't showing the board." His expression shifted from concern to understanding. "You mean the real turnover figures? The cost overruns? The missed deadlines?" "All of it," I said. "And any proof that his projections are smoke and mirrors." Oliver hesitated only for a moment before nodding. "Give me a couple of days." My next call was to a woman named Teresa Alvarez, a former HR manager who had resigned 6 months ago under suspicious circumstances. "I'm surprised to hear from you," she said when we met at a quiet wine bar that evening. "I heard Daniel canned you." "He did," I said. "And in the process, he gave me the one thing I needed, a reason to use what I've been holding on to." Her brow furrowed. "And that is control," I said simply. "And I want to rebuild the company the way it used to be. But first, I need the truth about how many complaints HR buried under Martin's and now Daniel's leadership." Teresa sighed, swirling the wine in her glass. "You'll find plenty. I left because they wouldn't let me investigate 2 harassment cases, both swept under the rug. If you're serious, I can get you the files. I kept copies, for my own protection." "I'm serious," I said. By Friday, I had more than I expected. A spreadsheet from Oliver showing that voluntary turnover had spiked 43% in Daniel's first quarter. Internal memos from Teresa proving multiple HR complaints were closed without proper review. Email chains between Daniel and the CFO discussing creative accounting for quarterly reports. None of it was sensational tabloid material. It was worse. Boring, undeniable, corporate malpractice. The kind the board couldn't ignore without exposing themselves. That weekend, I didn't celebrate or gloat. I worked. I went through the documents page by page, organizing them into a binder with neat tabs. Finance, HR, operations, projections versus reality. Every number, every complaint, every email was backed by a source. No embellishments, no easy denials. Margaret called late Sunday evening. "I've prepared the notice," she said. "Once you sign, it will be sent by courier to each board member. The agenda is clear. Special meeting to review and appoint executive leadership." "Good," I said. "Send it first thing Monday." "You know they'll call you the moment they get it," she said. "I'm counting on it." Monday morning, my phone lit up before 9 a.m. with an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a text from an old board contact. "Lizzie, what is this? Is this a joke?" I didn't reply. The silence was part of the plan. The less they knew before Thursday, the more off balance they'd be when I walked into that room. That night, as I sat on my couch with the binder open in front of me, I thought about the first time I'd stepped into that building as a young analyst, clutching a fresh degree and a head full of ideas. Back then, the company had been different. My father used to say, "A company is just people with a purpose." Somewhere along the way, that purpose had been replaced by ego. Daniel Cross had no idea that when he'd called me a waste of payroll in front of the entire floor, he'd also handed me the perfect opening line for Thursday's meeting, because I planned to repeat it, word for word, and then show them exactly what payroll waste really looked like. By Tuesday morning, the storm was beginning to gather. The board still didn't have the full picture, but the notice Margaret sent had done its job. Panic was starting to ripple behind closed doors. I knew because my phone had lit up half a dozen times before breakfast with calls from numbers I recognized. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I went to meet with Caroline Webb, a woman whose reputation in the corporate world was something between a scalpel and a hurricane. She was a governance consultant, the kind boards called when they needed problems handled quietly. I had hired her 2 years ago for a side project, and we'd stayed in touch. Caroline arrived at the hotel lounge where we agreed to meet, her dark hair pulled back, her leather briefcase looking heavy enough to double as a weapon. "Lizzie," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "Margaret gave me the broad strokes. I need details." I handed her the binder. "Everything in here is verified. Turnover data, buried HR complaints, financial misstatements. I'm not interested in smearing Daniel. I want a factual case strong enough to stand on its own." She flipped through a few pages, her brows lifting slightly. "You've got more than enough. This isn't just bad leadership. It's fiduciary negligence. If the board ignores this, they're exposing themselves legally." "That's the point," I said. "They can't just wave it away." Caroline closed the binder and looked me dead in the eye. "Thursday is going to be ugly. Are you ready for that?" "I've been ready since the day he fired me." After Caroline left, I sat for a moment with my coffee, thinking about the version of myself who had walked into that conference room last week and been dismissed like an inconvenience. That version of me had smiled politely and walked away. This version was coming back with the majority of the company in her pocket. By Wednesday afternoon, the whispers had grown louder. An old colleague, Maya, texted me, "Daniel's on edge. He canceled 2 meetings today and shut himself in his office. What's going on?" I typed and deleted my reply 3 times before settling on, "Just tell him Thursday will be interesting." That night, I met Oliver in the same cafe as before. He slid a USB drive across the table. "That's the raw server log for Q2 reports," he said quietly. "You'll see what we actually made compared to the fantasy numbers Daniel's been feeding the board." I didn't have to look yet to know it would be damning. I'd already seen enough in the partial data to know revenue had been flat, if not declining. "Oliver," I said, "why are you helping me?" "This could blow back on you." He shrugged, but his eyes were hard. "Because this used to be a place worth working for. If you can bring that back, it's worth the risk." Thursday morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of day that tricks you into thinking nothing bad could happen. I dressed deliberately. Navy suit, white blouse, no jewelry except for my watch. Professional, unshakable, neutral. A mirror image of the woman Daniel thought he had erased from the company. Margaret met me in the lobby of the building. "They're all here," she said in a low voice, "and they've been talking to each other since 8 a.m. "Good," I replied. "Let them talk." It'll make what's coming harder to swallow. As we stepped into the elevator, I could feel the shift in my own breathing. Calm, measured, almost like standing backstage before a performance. When we entered the boardroom, the conversation cut off instantly. The long oak table gleamed under the recessed lighting, and every leather chair was filled. Daniel sat at the far end, his posture stiff, his jaw tight. "Well," he said, his tone almost mocking. "This is unexpected." I placed my folder on the table and sat at the head seat without asking. The air shifted. "This meeting," I began, "was called under the authority of the majority shareholder." Several board members exchanged quick glances. One of them, Mr. Redmond, cleared his throat. "Majority shareholder? Lizzie, what are you talking about?" I slid the ownership documents forward. 2 days before my termination, I finalized the purchase of 62% of this company's voting shares. It is a private transfer, legally binding, and filed in accordance with corporate governance. A hush settled over the room. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You can't be serious." "I am," I said. "And I called this meeting for one reason, to review the current executive leadership." The rest of the meeting was scheduled to be procedural, but I knew the real showdown would come after I presented the evidence. That was when the facade Daniel had been wearing since the moment I walked in would crack. For now, I kept my voice steady, my words simple, and my cards close. I wanted him to feel the walls inching in without seeing the hammer until it dropped. And when it did, I wanted it to be so undeniable that even his allies on the board wouldn't be able to save him. As I left the building that afternoon, I passed Daniel in the lobby. His expression was tight, but there was a flicker of something else there now. Uncertainty. He still thought he had time to get ahead of me. He didn't realize Thursday was just the beginning. The boardroom was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. I sat at the head of the table, the ownership documents spread neatly before me, and let the pause stretch just long enough to make every eye in the room stay on me. "As majority shareholder," I began, "I'm exercising my right to call for a formal review of the current executive leadership. That includes the position of CEO." Daniel gave a short, derisive laugh. "This is absurd. You're making a spectacle of yourself, Lizzie. You've been gone a week and you think you understand what's needed at this level?" I met his gaze evenly. "I understand more than you think, and I have data to back it up." I opened the binder I'd brought, the one I'd spent nights assembling with Oliver's and Teresa's help, and slid the first packet across to the board secretary. "These are the actual Q2 revenue numbers pulled directly from our internal server logs. They don't match the figures presented in the last board report." The secretary glanced at the first page, then looked sharply at Daniel. "They're taken out of context," Daniel said quickly. "Normal accounting variances." 47% variance? I asked, my voice still calm. "If that's normal, then this company is in worse shape than I thought." Mr. Redmond, one of the senior board members, cleared his throat. "Daniel, that's a significant gap." "It's a timing issue," Daniel insisted. I didn't argue. Instead, I passed out the second set of documents, HR complaint summaries. "This," I said, "is a list of formal employee complaints filed in the last 9 months, none of which were investigated according to policy. Several involve serious allegations that were closed without resolution." One of the newer board members, Ms. Carter, frowned as she flipped through the pages. "These are serious. Why weren't we made aware?" "Because," I said, turning my attention back to Daniel, "the complaints were buried. You signed off on at least 2 of them personally." "That's not—" "Your signature is on the closure forms," I interrupted, keeping my tone even. Page 12. There was a rustle of paper as board members flipped to the page. Daniel shifted in his seat, the confident smirk gone now, replaced by the first signs of strain. I let the weight of the documents hang in the air for a beat before moving to the final tab in my binder. Projections versus reality. "These," I said, distributing the last packet, are side-by-side comparisons of Daniel's public growth projections versus actual performance under his leadership. Revenue is flat. Market share has dropped 2 points in the last quarter alone. Employee turnover in key departments is up 43%, and yet executive bonuses increased by 15%. For a moment, the only sound was the turning of pages. When Mr. Redmond finally spoke, his voice was low but firm. "Daniel, this is troubling." Daniel's hands tightened on the table. "She's twisting numbers to make her personal vendetta look legitimate. None of this is actionable." I leaned forward slightly, my voice quiet but carrying. "This isn't personal, Daniel. This is governance, and the board's duty is to act in the best interest of the company and its shareholders. I happen to be the majority shareholder, which means this motion doesn't need a second vote to pass." The words seemed to land like a physical blow. A few board members exchanged looks, some leaned back, their decision already made. I picked up the final sheet of paper in front of me. The formal motion to remove Daniel Cross as CEO effective immediately. As majority shareholder, I cast my vote in favor. I said, 62%. Motion carries. For a moment, no one moved. Then the board secretary cleared his throat. "In accordance with company bylaws, the motion stands. Daniel, your termination is effective upon this notice." Daniel stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is a joke," he said, his voice rising. "You won't survive a month without me. The company will fall apart." I closed the binder calmly. "It's been falling apart with you." Security didn't have to be called. He gathered his things in jerky movements, avoiding everyone's eyes. As he reached the door, he turned back to me. "You have no idea what you're doing." I met his gaze one last time. "I know exactly what I'm doing." The door shut behind him with a soft click. The room stayed quiet for a moment longer before Ms. Carter broke the silence. "Well, that was unexpected." Mr. Redmond looked at me over his glasses. "Lizzie, I'll be honest. I didn't know you had this kind of leverage. But if even half of this data is accurate, the board had no choice." "It's accurate," I said simply. The meeting moved on to procedural matters, appointing an interim CEO, reviewing immediate operational priorities. But I barely registered the details. My focus was on the shift I could feel in the room. When I'd walked in, I was the outsider, the ex-employee making a scene. When I walked out, I was the person holding the future of the company in my hands. And that was only the beginning. The door clicked shut behind Daniel, and for a long second the room felt too big and too quiet. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even move. I just let my shoulders drop a fraction, the way you do when the thing you've been bracing for finally happens and your body hasn't caught up yet. "We still need to run the company," Mr. Redmond said at last, practical as ever. "Interim leadership." "I'll take responsibility for the transition," I replied. "But I don't want a coronation. We do this properly." Margaret nodded once beside me, reading my mind. "I'll circulate a resolution naming an interim CEO and an independent operating committee for 90 days. You'll chair the committee, Lizzie." "Fine," I said. "But the interim CEO should be someone who knows the business and doesn't want the job long term." We landed on Richard Huang, our head of engineering, a soft-spoken builder with zero appetite for politics. He agreed on the spot, on the condition that the role be strictly temporary and that we put a real plan in place for the next quarter. It was exactly the kind of condition I wanted to hear. By the time we walked out of the boardroom, it was early afternoon. The lobby felt different. Quieter, but somehow cleaner. I didn't go to the corner office. I asked facilities to open the main hall instead. "Town hall in 30, I told the receptionist. "Invite everyone. Floor staff, interns, custodial, contract workers, nobody off the list." I took a breath in the empty hall and listened to the hum of the vents. My father used to test the acoustics here by clapping once and counting the half-echo. I did the same, quietly, and the sound came back small and clear. Good, no theatrics, just sound carrying without strain. When people started filing in, they did it cautiously, like they weren't sure if this was mandatory or a trap. I stepped to the front with no microphone and no slides, just a stack of papers under my arm and a glass of water. "Some of you know me," I began. "Some of you saw me escorted out last week. Both things are true." A ripple of nervous laughter broke, quick and human. "I'm not here to make a speech," I said. "I'm here to be accountable, and to ask for yours. Today, the board removed the CEO. Effective immediately, we have an interim leadership structure for 90 days. During that time, bonuses for senior executives are suspended. We're hiring an independent firm to audit the last 3 quarters and to review every HR complaint closed in the last year. We'll publish the outcomes internally. No names, but real actions." Heads lifted. Not celebration. Attention. "If you filed a complaint and felt ignored," I continued, "we will contact you. If you left because you were dismissed or overlooked, expect a call if we need you back. It won't fix everything overnight, but we start today." I didn't give them a slogan. I gave them a phone number. A reinstated ethics line routed to the external auditor, not to HR. A QR code on the screens for anonymous input. A simple email. rebuild@company.com, monitored by me and 2 outside counsel with whistleblower protection experience. It wasn't flashy. It was infrastructure. At the end, I said the line I had promised myself I would say only if I'd earned it. Last week, I was called a waste of payroll. I want you to know what payroll is to me. Names, not numbers. If we can't say your name and what you do well, we don't deserve your work. There was no applause at first. Then there was. Not loud, not performative. Just enough to tell me people had registered the difference between a show and a plan. The next days were unglamorous. We canceled a ridiculous executive offsite that had been booked at a mountain resort. That money paid for back pay owed to the warehouse team for overtime miscalculated under a pilot scheduling program. We shut down 2 vanity projects in marketing and redeployed their budgets to hiring 3 desperately needed support engineers. When the audit firm asked for access, we gave them everything. Every server, every folder, every inbox under legal hold. I told them on the record, "If you find something that makes me look bad, include it." Oliver came by my desk. Just a normal workstation on the 3rd floor I had borrowed while the interim structure held. He looked at the monitor, then at me. "You're really doing it," he said. Not a question. "Slowly," I said. "The only revenge that lasts is the kind that improves things." He grinned at that. "You're going to put that on a mug?" "No," I said. "I'm going to put it in payroll." On Tuesday of the following week, an email went out. HR was reopening cases. Teresa, who had left rather than be complicit, agreed to return as an external advisor to rebuild the function with clear standards and timelines. She asked for one non-negotiable: final say on whether cases could be closed without action. I gave it to her, with board oversight. Investors wanted a call. I scheduled it for Friday. No spin. "We're restating Q2, I told them plainly. Not because we failed, but because we refuse to lie. Our path forward is boring. Better retention, better products, realistic targets. There was a beat of silence, then a few tough questions. And then, unexpectedly, 2 funds asked about increasing their positions if we hit the new lower guidance. Reality, it turns out, is investable. The day the audit report came back, I read it in a conference room with the blinds half drawn. It was worse in places than I'd hoped and better in others than I'd feared. We published the summary to staff with the actions already attached. Reimbursements for misallocated travel, clawbacks where permissible, training where necessary, termination where justified. Names kept private, remedies public. I walked the floors more in those weeks than I had in the last year. I learned the names of the night cleaning crew. I sat with the support team on a Saturday morning and listened to the scripts they'd been forced to use, the ones that had them apologizing for defects they didn't cause. We wrote a new script together. Shorter, honest, backed by a promise engineering signed. One evening, passing the whiteboard by engineering, I noticed new handwriting. Someone had written, "We stopped whispering." Underneath, someone else had added, "We started fixing." I stood there longer than I meant to. It was not profound poetry. It was better. Measurable culture. On the 90th day, we gathered the board again. Richard gave back the interim badge with relief and a joke about getting to sleep again. We voted. Formally this time. I accepted the role of CEO because the work needed a spine, and I could offer mine. Then I did something I'd promised myself in the quiet. I asked for a performance review after 6 months conducted by the same outside firm doing the audit. Audit, with the results shared internally. Power is safest when it expects to be measured. I called another town hall. This time the seats filled faster. I wore the same navy suit from the day Daniel tried to humiliate me, not for symbolism, but because it reminded me that clothes are just fabric. It's the choices that make them mean anything. "I won't pretend the last months were easy," I said. "They weren't. Some of you lost managers you liked. Some of you had to relive things you'd rather forget. Thank you for telling the truth anyway." I paused, thinking of my father, of the ribbon he'd cut on that first warehouse, of the calluses on his hands that never quite went away even after he became executive. He used to say a company is just people with a purpose. I finally understood the sentence he didn't say out loud. The purpose is to make people better, not smaller. "If there's a message in all of this," I said, "it's simple. Leadership isn't volume and revenge isn't ruin. Leadership is accountability, and revenge, if you insist on calling it that, is the choice to rebuild what someone else tried to break." Afterward, Maya from Ops found me in the aisle. "Do you think Daniel knows?" she asked softly. "How this turned out?" "I don't know," I said. "And I don't need to." That night, alone in the office, I finally went up to the corner room. I didn't change the desk or the windows. I did replace the photographs on the wall with images from the shop floor and the help desk and the warehouse. On the credenza, I set one frame. My father and me at that first ribbon cutting, both of us squinting into the sun, proud for reasons I could not have named then. I opened the latest report. Revenue was up, modestly, honestly. Customer satisfaction had climbed. Turnover had slowed. None of it was meteoric. All of it was real. There was a soft knock. "Come in," I said. Teresa stood in the doorway holding a slim folder. "Final update," she said. "We've cleared the backlog. People are starting to trust the process again." "Thank you," I said, meaning it. She hesitated. "You okay?" I looked around the room, at the city, at the work. "I am," I said. Not triumphant, not vengeful, just steady. "We're okay." When she left, I closed my laptop and let the quiet expand. The revenge everyone wanted to see, the dramatic kind, the kind with fireworks, had already happened the day the door clicked behind Daniel. What mattered afterward was the choice I made next. I chose to build. I knew something was off the second I saw his shadow cross the frosted glass of my cubicle wall. It was barely 11 a.m., and my manager, Tom, had that hurried, clipped walk he only used when he was about to swing his weight around. He didn't bother with good mornings or small talk. Instead, he stopped at the edge of my desk and said, flat and cold, "Shut down your workstation and leave." No explanation, no context, just an order. Now, in a normal office, that might mean grab your bag, take an early lunch, maybe we're having an impromptu fire drill. But this wasn't a normal office, and Tom wasn't the type to do favors. My desk wasn't just a desk. It was the only terminal directly linked to our biggest client's live feed. A high-security connection that streamed real-time product data, monitored inventory, and coordinated distribution for a launch that had been in the works for months. I didn't say anything right away. Just looked up at him. His jaw was tight, like he was daring me to challenge him. "You heard me?" he added, crossing his arms. Do you want me to log out of the monitoring software or actually power down the system? I asked, deliberately slow. He rolled his eyes. Don't play games. Full shutdown. Now. I could have asked why. Could have reminded him the COO had been checking in daily on this project. But years of working under Tom had taught me that reasoning with him was like trying to teach a brick to swim. So I just nodded, turned back to my screen, and began the shutdown sequence. The secure console flickered through its warnings, disconnecting live stream, terminating processes, severing data feed. Each confirmation prompt felt heavier than the last. It took less than 60 seconds to pull the plug on months of careful setup. The screen went black. The terminal fan wound down to silence. It was done. I logged the action in the system audit. Client feed terminated, per manager instruction. No flourish, no commentary. Just a fact that would stay there forever. Leave your badge on the desk, Tom said. I took it off my lanyard and set it down. Am I coming back? I asked. He smirked. We'll see. Take the rest of the day. I'll handle things from here. He didn't wait for me to pack my bag, just turned and strode off toward the elevator. I watched him go, my mind already turning over the decision he'd just made. Tom had never liked that I was the only one trusted with the live feed terminal. I'd built the system from scratch when the client signed with us, a secure connection no one else in the department knew how to maintain. I documented everything, of course, but the COO had insisted the live feed remain in my control for security reasons. Tom called it territorial. I called it keeping a $2 million contract from collapsing. He didn't understand the stakes. Or maybe he didn't care. I took my time gathering my things. My phone buzzed with a couple of Slack pings, random chatter about lunch plans. Out of habit, I checked the feed status on my personal device, even though I already knew what I'd see. Offline. Completely dark. Tom wouldn't notice the difference immediately. He'd head to lunch, probably brag to someone about finally taking control of the feed. But I knew exactly what would happen next. The client had a major product launch in 2 hours. Their marketing campaign was synchronized with the live feed, their distributors standing by for green light signals only the system could send. Every minute offline was a minute closer to chaos. I walked past the reception desk, keeping my pace steady. Heading out early? The receptionist asked. Something like that, I said with a small smile. The elevator doors closed behind me, and for a brief moment, I considered going home and letting the chips fall where they may. But the truth was, I wanted to see it. I wanted to be there when Tom's decision detonated in real time. So instead of heading for the street, I went down one floor to the small cafe that overlooked the lobby. Ordered a coffee. Sat by the window with a perfect view of our office entrance. 25 minutes later, Tom returned from lunch. His tie was loose, his phone in one hand, coffee in the other. He looked relaxed, like a man who thought he'd just made a big power move. He didn't see them at first. The client rep in her tailored navy suit, the COO standing beside her, both faces tight with urgency. They were waiting for him, right in front of the reception desk. I couldn't hear their words from the cafe, but I didn't need to. I saw the COO lean in, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. Their product launch is in 2 hours. Why is the system offline? Tom froze, mid-step. The coffee in his hand wobbled, and I just sat there, sipping mine, knowing this was only the first crack in what was about to be a very public collapse. From my spot in the cafe, I watched Tom's expression shift. It started with confusion. His head tilting slightly, brows drawn together. Then the first flicker of realization. The COO wasn't just stopping by for a friendly chat. The client rep leaned in, her gestures sharp, clipped. Her phone was in her hand, the screen angled toward him like proof in a courtroom. I could almost imagine the headline scrolling across her mind. Critical system offline. Launch in jeopardy. Tom's mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear. He held his hands out in that half-open way he used when he wanted to look cooperative, but was really just stalling. The COO's reply was short. His posture stiff, chin down, eyes locked on Tom's face like he was reading a confession. Then he turned toward the elevators. Tom hesitated, then followed, still trying to talk, the client rep trailing behind them. I didn't have to guess where they were going. The server room was on the same floor as my old desk. I stirred my coffee slowly, letting the steam curl into the air. It wasn't gloating. Not yet. Just watching a situation unfold exactly the way I knew it would. By the time I went back upstairs, the energy in the office had shifted. You can feel it when something's wrong. Conversations drop to a murmur. People glance toward closed doors. The air feels thinner somehow. Two of the junior analysts were huddled near the printer, speaking in low voices. One of them spotted me and straightened. "Hey, I thought you left," she said. "I grabbed a coffee," I replied, keeping my tone even. "What's going on?" They exchanged a look. "The feed's down," the other one whispered. "The client's here. Tom's in the server room with the COO, and they don't look happy." I gave a small, sympathetic nod, the kind you give when you're pretending to be surprised. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I caught sight of Tom pacing, hands on his hips. The COO stood by the table, phone to his ear, his free hand tapping against his leg in a steady, impatient rhythm. The client rep sat stiffly, arms crossed, gaze fixed on Tom like she was trying to bore a hole through him. It would be easy to think I wanted this, seeing him flounder, watching his smugness chip away in real time. But it was more complicated than that. For months, I'd been warning him that the live feed was fragile in the lead up to the launch. Not because the system was unstable, it wasn't, but because it relied on specific security protocols. The terminal was configured with encryption keys that couldn't just be copied and pasted somewhere else. Disconnected improperly, and the client's servers would reject any attempt to reconnect. I'd sent him the documentation. Twice. He'd skimmed the first page and tossed it aside. "This stuff's too complicated," he'd said once, laughing. "UIT people love to make it sound harder than it is." Except it wasn't too complicated. It was exactly as complicated as it needed to be to keep a $2 million contract safe from careless hands. The conference room door opened and the COO stepped out, his expression unreadable. He walked straight past my desk without a glance, heading toward the CEO's office. That was bad. Really bad. Tom came out a few seconds later. His face was flushed, collar slightly askew like he'd been arguing and losing. He spotted me. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Finishing my coffee," I said, motioning toward the paper cup on my desk. "You were told to leave." "And I was told to shut down the terminal," I said, my voice neutral. "I did exactly what you asked." His jaw tightened. "You could have warned me." I blinked at him, keeping my tone level. "Tom, I confirmed the order twice. You didn't want explanations, remember?" He didn't answer, just turned and stalked back toward his office. By mid-afternoon, the whispers had spread. People were checking their phones, probably reading client emails or internal messages about the launch delay. The junior analysts were pulling up older backups, trying to find a workaround, but I knew it wouldn't work. The system wasn't designed to be patched together in an emergency. That was the point. We'd built it with strict security in mind. Any deviation, and it shut down rather than risk data corruption or leaks. And here's the thing about high-profile launches. They're like domino lines. One piece falls, and everything else follows. Marketing campaigns stall. Distribution freezes. Contracts start bleeding penalty clauses. I kept my head down, answering a few unrelated emails, acting like I wasn't listening when snippets of the unfolding disaster drifted over the cubicle walls. Around 4 p.m., I saw the client rep leave. She didn't shake Tom's hand. She didn't even look at him. The COO escorted her to the lobby, his posture rigid. Tom stayed in his office, blinds drawn. I sat there, letting the weight of the day settle in. I hadn't engineered any of this. I hadn't pulled a stunt or sabotaged anything. I'd simply followed an order to the letter, and now the consequences were piling up in a neat, unavoidable stack on Tom's desk. The thing about moments like this is, they reveal something important. not just about the people involved, but about the environment you're in. A good leader takes responsibility. A bad one looks for someone to blame. And I had a sinking feeling that tomorrow Tom would try to make this my fault, which meant I'd need to be ready. I didn't expect to sleep much that night, and I didn't. My mind kept replaying the moment in the cafe, the COO's face tightening as he spoke, Tom's coffee hand wobbling, and then fast-forwarding to what I knew was coming next. Corporate disasters don't stay quiet for long. By morning, emails would be flying, calls would be made, and somewhere along the line, Tom would realize that the easiest way to save himself was to point the finger at me. When I walked into the office the next day, the shift in atmosphere was impossible to miss. People weren't making eye contact. Conversations stopped when I got close. On my desk, a single printed sheet of paper waited. Meeting at 9 a.m., Conference Room B. Attendees, Tom H., Anna M., HR, COO. No subject line, no explanation, which told me everything. At 8:59, I walked into the conference room. HR was already there, her notebook open, pen poised. The COO sat at the far end of the table, phone face down in front of him, expression like granite. Tom was leaning back in his chair, one arm draped casually over the backrest, the other holding a pen he kept tapping against the table, trying to look relaxed. "Anna," he said, giving me a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Let's go over what happened yesterday." I sat down, placing my notebook on the table. "Of course." Tom leaned forward. The live feed went down right before a major client launch. This caused significant disruption and reputational damage. Now, as I understand it, you were the last person to operate the terminal before it went offline. The COO's gaze stayed on me, unreadable. HR's pen hovered over the page. "That's correct," I said evenly. I shut it down per Tom's direct instruction at approximately 11:04 a.m. yesterday. The action was logged in the system audit. Tom shifted in his chair. "You could have told me it was linked to the client's feed. Instead, you just did it." I met his eyes. "Tom, I confirmed the order twice. The second time, I asked if you wanted me to delete the connection. You said yes. You didn't ask for an explanation, and you've told me in the past to avoid overcomplicating things." The COO's head tilted slightly. "Did you know the shutdown would sever the client's launch feed?" "Yes," I said. "And I also knew it couldn't be reconnected without reauthentication, which requires compliance approval. That's why I asked for confirmation twice." Tom laughed lightly, shaking his head. "She's framing it like I just signed off on tanking the launch. That's not what happened." I didn't look away. The audit log contains the exact text. Client feed terminated, per manager instruction. Time-stamped. Immutable. The COO turned toward Tom. "Is that accurate?" Tom hesitated. "It may be how it appears, but I didn't know what I was authorizing." "And yet you authorized it," the COO said, his tone still flat. HR scribbled something down without looking up. The meeting wrapped after 30 more minutes of circling the same drain. Tom insisting he wasn't told. Me repeating that I confirmed twice. The COO asking variations of the same question. "Why did you give the order at all?" When we left, Tom brushed past me in the hallway. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" he muttered under his breath. I stopped walking. "Enjoying watching the company lose a $2 million contract?" "No, Tom, but I am enjoying finally having something in writing." He froze for just a second before continuing down the hall. By lunch, word had spread even further. I could feel eyes on me in the break room, hear the low hum of speculation in the corridors. People love a scandal, especially when it's internal. I kept my head down and worked. There were still other clients to manage, other projects to run. The COO's office door stayed shut most of the afternoon, and Tom's blinds were drawn again. Around 3 p.m., an email from HR landed in my inbox. "Please prepare any documentation, correspondence, or notes relevant to the events of yesterday. Forward directly to me before 10 a.m. tomorrow. That was the moment I knew Tom's situation was worse than he realized. HR doesn't put things like that in writing unless they're building a case, and I had plenty to give them. Back at my desk, I opened a folder on my personal drive. Every email where Tom dismissed my concerns. Every meeting note where he'd waved away security protocols. Screenshots of Slack messages where he'd bragged about streamlining by cutting corners. All time-stamped, all archived. I didn't need to manipulate anything. The truth was enough. By the time I shut down for the day, I had a neat, ordered file ready to send. A factual, clinical record of how we'd gotten here. Tom thought yesterday had been the crisis. He hadn't realized yet. It was just the first crack. I woke before my alarm, the gray light of an overcast morning cutting a thin line across my bedroom wall. My phone was face down on the nightstand, but I didn't need to check it to know what would be waiting. Emails, pings, calendar holds that looked innocuous at a glance and felt like subpoenas when you opened them. I got to the office 10 minutes early. The building's lobby smelled faintly of bleach and overbrewed coffee. Upstairs, the floor was too quiet. That particular don't make noise around a wounded animal, quiet. At 8:07 a.m., the COO sent a calendar invite. 9:30, emergency, client status, and next steps. Attendees, CEO, COO, HR, legal, IT lead, Anna, Tom, legal. That told me the temperature. At 8:22, HR replied to my document submission with a one-line email. Received. Thank you for the thoroughness. No emojis, no softening adjectives, just acknowledgement. Clinical, like a gloved hand placing a file on a steel table. I made tea I didn't want and stared at the steam until it disappeared. My screensaver reflected me back. Blouse crisp, hair neat, eyes steady. You wouldn't have known my heart was doing that controlled drummer's roll it does before fire drills and presentations. At 9:27, I walked into the big conference room. The blinds were half open, winter light flattening everything to the same paper color. The CEO stood at the head of the table with a printout in his hand. The COO sat to his right, jaw set. HR had lined up 3 pens next to her legal pad like scalpels. Our IT lead, Marcus, was already plugged into the projector. Tom took the seat far end, like he could put distance between himself and the screen. The CEO didn't bother with greetings. The client's counsel formally notified us at 8:51 that they're invoking the penalty clause for launch disruption. He said, they're also reserving the right to terminate for cause. He looked around the table. $2 million in annual revenue, at risk, plus penalties. A stillness moved through the room. Not shock. Recognition. The COO nodded at Marcus. Show the sequence. Marcus brought up the audit trail. He scrolled past routine entries, timestamps ticking like metronome clicks. Then the line sat there in 14-point font, simple as a kitchen knife. 11:04:17. Client live feed terminated, per manager instruction. The CEO didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Explain why that instruction was given. All eyes slid to Tom. He cleared his throat and tried on a reasonable smile. We were consolidating control of key systems. The terminal was owned by one employee. That's not scalable. It was the only terminal authenticated to the client's live feed. The COO said, flat. The reauthentication window is measured in days, not hours, by design. Removing it inside launch week is not consolidation. It's negligence. Tom's chin lifted a fraction. I was not informed that shutting down the machine would sever the live feed. If I had been warned, I kept my voice even. Yesterday at 11:02, I asked if you wanted a full shutdown or just a session logout. You said full shutdown now. I asked again if you wanted me to terminate the live connection. You said, don't play games. Marcus clicked to the cross-reference. My terminal log, Slack timestamps, Tom's calendar entry labeled Ops Cleanup. The timings nested together like puzzle pieces. No drama, just alignment. Legal spoke for the first time, glasses low on her nose. Ms. M, did you make any discretionary decisions beyond the instruction? No, I said. I executed the command I was given and documented it. Did you withhold information that would have prevented the instruction? I asked for confirmation twice, I said. Mr. H has repeatedly directed me not to overcomplicate explanations. I kept my language simple. I also sent him the security protocol summary last week. I slid a printed copy forward. This one. HR took it without looking up. The COO didn't move. He just watched Tom. Tom leaned toward the table, palms up, voice warmer now, like we were old friends who'd had a small misunderstanding. Look, the core issue is single-point failure. We can fix that by distributing access. After the fact, the COO said, yesterday you removed the only authenticated point during a critical window. The CEO set his printout down. We're not debating architecture. We're dealing with consequences. We have a client threatening termination, penalties accruing, and a system that cannot reconnect without a compliance cycle. He turned to me. How long to restore if we prioritize? I didn't answer right away. I pictured the steps, the signatures, the two-step with the client's security officer, the test packets, the validation hash. If the client cooperates immediately, best case 48 hours. Realistically, 72. There are external approvals we don't control. The CEO's jaw tightened in quiet calculation. Tom tried to wedge himself back in. Anna can accelerate it. She's done it before. I met the CEO's eyes. I can coordinate and execute, but it requires the process we agreed with the client. No shortcuts, no side doors. The room held its breath for a beat. That wasn't a threat. It was the truth. Process exists to protect people from exactly this. The CEO nodded once. Understood. He turned to HR. We will address accountability separately. Right now, we need to limit damage. HR wrote a neat line. It looked like a verdict even before it was one. The meeting broke into tasking. Marcus would prep the staging environment. Legal would triage the penalty language. The COO would call the client's COO and keep him on the line until our first handshake passed. Tom remained seated, staring at the table like it might offer him a new version of events if he just looked hard enough. When the room thinned, he followed me into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind us. The carpet swallowed our steps. Help me out here, he said softly. You know I didn't mean to crater the launch. Say I misunderstood you. Say anything that takes the edge off. I kept my voice calm. Tom, I'm not your edge. I let that sit. What I am is the person who told you for 3 months that these controls weren't optional. You called it territorial. You called it gatekeeping. He swallowed, color high in his face. Your tone doesn't help you, you know. My tone didn't shut down the feed. He leaned closer, voice dropping. If you hang me out to dry, you'll look vindictive. You'll get a reputation here. I blinked once. I have a reputation here. I do my job, I document, and I make sure people get paid and systems stay up. I'm not changing that today. He stared at me a second longer, then gave a tight, practiced smile that never reached his eyes. Careful, he said, and walked away. Careful. The word echoed like a thrown coin hitting tile. At 11:15, the COO asked me to join a call in his office with the client team. Their security officer sounded tired but professional. We stepped through the recovery plan line by line. I could hear keyboards in the background on their end, the muffled click of a door, a low voice asking for an ETA. We'll prioritize approvals, their officer said, but we're documenting root cause. Send your internal audit and the instruction chain. The COO glanced at me. I nodded. You'll have everything within the hour, he said. We ended the call with timelines no one liked but everyone could live with. The COO exhaled once, long. Thank you, he said to me. Not warm, not cold, just real. Back at my desk, I packaged the logs, the Slack confirmations, the security summary I'd sent last week. the change control calendar. Facts lined up in a row, each one small, together a wall. At 12:42, the CEO's assistant put a 30-minute block on my calendar. 3 p.m. Follow-up and accountability. Tom was on the invite. HR too. I saved my work and looked out across the office. Phones rang. Printers hummed. A laugh surfaced and died quickly. From Tom's office, the blinds were open again. He was on the phone, gesturing with a pen, his smile visible even through glass. Spin in progress. I thought about the message buried under the mess. Systems don't fail because someone followed a process. They fail when someone in a hurry decides the rules are optional. Leadership isn't about knowing every line of code or every clause in a contract. It's about knowing when to listen and when to ask the second question before you give the first order. I sent the audit bundle to legal, CC'd HR and the COO. Then I stood to refill my tea. The kettle hissed softly. Steam rose and vanished. In the glass of the break room, my reflection looked like it had slept. At 2:59, I was outside the conference room door. I could hear voices. Low, contained. The way people talk when they're arranging heavy furniture and don't want to scratch the floor. I opened the door. Tom was already seated, back very straight, hands folded on the table like a student hoping posture might count for extra credit. HR had 2 folders this time. The CEO looked up. "We're going to set the record," he said. And for the first time since yesterday, I felt the ground steady under my feet. Not because the outcome would be easy, because the truth was finally the only version left in the room. The door clicked shut behind me, and for a second all I could hear was the HVAC hum. Steady, indifferent, the sound buildings make when they don't care who keeps their lights on. The CEO nodded to the chair across from him. "Anna." His voice was level. "Thanks for joining." HR slid one of the 2 folders toward the center of the table, the tab marked with a small piece of red tape. Tom stared at it like it might detonate. "We're going to set the record," the CEO said, hands folded. "I want this simple." He looked at me first. "You shut down the live feed terminal yesterday at 11:04 a.m., correct?" "Yes." I kept my tone neutral. Per Tom's direct instruction. I confirmed twice. The action and the confirmation are in the logs I sent to legal at 12:42 today. HR flipped open the folder to a printed copy of the audit trail. My words sat on the page like a held breath. The CEO turned to Tom. "Did you give that instruction?" Tom inhaled, shoulders lifting. I gave an instruction to clean up. I believed we were logging out of a session. I was not informed that the system design would... "Did you give the instruction?" the CEO repeated. "To shut down the workstation?" Tom's eyes flicked to HR, then back. "Yes." A beat. No one moved. The building hummed. "We'll let legal finish their interviews," the CEO said. "But based on the chain of documentation, the external impact, and the client's current posture, we're placing you on paid administrative leave effective immediately pending the outcome." Tom blinked twice, slow, like a reboot that wouldn't take. "Leave? We need continuity. I should be part of the remediation." "The remediation is proceeding," the COO said, voice calm enough to cut. "You won't be part of it." HR closed the folder. "Your network access will be suspended at 3:30. Please remain available for further questions. Security will accompany you to collect personal items." Tom's mouth opened, then closed. He gave a small, practiced smile that looked cracked at the edges. "This is political," he said, not to anyone in particular. "You're making me the headline so the client has a villain." The CEO didn't flinch. "We're acknowledging a decision and containing a problem." He glanced at me. "The recovery plan?" I opened my notebook. The steps were already in neat lines, each with a checkbox, each with a name. Staging handshake passed at 2:26. We'll receive the client's reauth token by 4:15 if their security officer hits her window. Our validation hash is ready on our side. If all goes clean, we can move to controlled reconnect at 5:30, monitoring for 2 hours before we widen scope. Best case then? The COO asked. We'll get status pings green for a subset today. Full throughput tomorrow after the second approval. Marketing will need to reschedule the public push. Ops can resume quietly tonight. No one cheered. Real life doesn't do triumphant music cues. It just assigns tasks. Do what you need, the CEO said. Then to HR. Coordinate with security. Tom's chair squeaked as he stood. He didn't look at me when he left. He looked past me like air would be kinder than a face. The door shut. The silence felt less dense. The COO turned to me. You'll lead the restore. You'll also propose a revised access model that prevents single-point operator and single-point manager failure. He let that hang for a moment. We'll fund it. That last sentence was the closest thing to an apology I was going to get from the building. I nodded. I'll send the draft by end of week. The CEO gathered his papers. There's one more item, he said, eyes on me. We're offering a retention bonus for carrying the recovery and a title adjustment. Interim director, systems reliability. Effective today if you want it. It's interim because you shouldn't be punished by a process that takes HR 6 weeks. I watched my pen roll a half-inch and stop. Interim. Reliable. Words that fit like solid shoes. I wasn't naive. Titles don't erase what happened yesterday. But they do change who gets to say no next time. I'll accept, I said. He nodded once. Good. They left me there with the table and the hum and the folder with the red tab. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The building had already decided what it would say. At 3:28, I returned to my desk. Security arrived 2 minutes later, quiet, professional. They stopped at Tom's door. A few heads lifted, then dropped, the way people look at a solar eclipse through their fingers. I opened the secure console. The staging link waited, patient and blinking. The client's token came through at 4:11, 4 minutes early. I messaged Marcus, then dialed into the bridge. Voices checked in, one after another, clipped and businesslike. Ops ready. Security ready. Client monitoring ready. Systems ready. We ran the sequence aloud, like pilots at a cockpit, not because we didn't know it, but because saying it out loud makes people careful. At 5:34, the first green indicators returned. At 5:41, a second cluster lit up. At 6:02, the client's security officer said, "We're seeing stable flow on our end." She didn't sound relieved exactly. She sounded like someone who'd slipped out of a rip current and was treading water parallel to shore. Hold at current scope, I said. We'll widen at 7 if the logs stay clean. The COO unmuted just long enough to say, "Thank you." Then he went quiet again, listening. Leaders who know what they don't know are easy to follow. At 7:06, we widened. Nothing spiked. Nothing sagged. The lights kept stacking green, and the room around me, still half full of people who had stayed because they understood that payroll and launches are synonyms for rent and pride, started breathing like a body again. At 8:12, we ended the call. No speech, no victory lap. Just a list of follow-ups and a second bridge scheduled for 7 a.m. I shut my laptop and sat back. Across the aisle, someone exhaled and laughed once, the kind that releases exactly the air it needs to and no more. The office smelled like stale coffee and warm plastic. The janitor's cart squeaked in the hall. On my way out, I passed the glass wall of the conference room. The chair Tom had used was still slightly pushed back, like it remembered he'd tried to make himself bigger in it. Security had been discreet. There was no parade. He would go home and call someone and say words like context and miscommunication, and no one told me. Maybe he would believe them. Maybe he wouldn't. Outside, the night air had that iron taste it gets before rain. I stood on the curb a moment, phone in my pocket, city noise folding and unfolding around me. My reflection in the window looked like a person who had done their job. That's the message, I thought. And it wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about the quiet math of responsibility. Systems don't care who's liked, they care who's careful. People get paid or they don't. Launches happen or they don't. You can manage by posture or you can manage by process, but only one of those survives contact with the real world. The next morning, the client's COO sent a 2-line email. Appreciate the speed and clarity. We'll suspend termination while we review. Continue with the revised access plan. No praise. No absolution. Just oxygen. I forwarded it to the team. Then I opened a new document and titled it Access and Accountability Model V1. I started writing the section headings I'd had in my head for weeks, long before yesterday tried to make a point with a sledgehammer. At 9:03, an unfamiliar name pinged my inbox. An HR business partner from another division. Congrats on the interim role. When you come up for air, I'd like to talk about cross-training your approach to our other teams. I smiled, just enough to feel it. The building hummed. The green lights held. And for the first time in days, the rhythm in my chest matched the steady blink of a system doing exactly what it was designed to do. Protect the people on the other end of the numbers.